We are in the Westmoreland, which is the new cafe at the Frick. It's the first time we have a cafe here in the museum. And it's so great to be here with Darren Waterston, who is the artist who worked on the murals and other aspects of the space. We met many years ago. A common friend, director of another museum on the Upper East Side, first introduced us. I actually had seen some of your work before. I'd seen Filthy Lucre, which is your homage take on the Peacock room by Whistler. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Frick? And obviously that's something that, as we got to know each other, I discovered that the Frick had a very important place in your life.
The first thing that brought me to the Frick was when I was in college as an art student at Otis Parsons in Los Angeles. My very first art history class was featuring a whole day talking about Bellini, and the presentation ended with St. Francis in the desert, and I was completely captivated by this painting. I was like, I have to see this painting. Where is it? How do I get there? I had never been to New York before. It was my first time. And the second day I got here, I rushed to the Frick and went to go find this painting. I think I stood in front of that painting, not unlike Bellini's depiction of St. Francis with his mouth agape and just kind of like, it was really a revelation for me. And it really was the moment where I thought the path of an artist is mine. Like, I have to do this no matter what. And from that time on, I've come to the Frick every year of my life since I was 19.
I love how that painting is sort of so central to your life, your vision as an artist. And, you wrote about it for one of our books, For the Sleeve Should Be Illegal. And you also lectured at the Frick in the past about that painting and about your work. So I think in a way it was a natural progression, an obvious progression, that when we started thinking about having an artist involved with the design of the cafe of the Westmoreland, we should, in a way, ask you. One of the things I love about this project is how different the two murals, in a way, feel. So here in the sort of vestibule, the anteroom to the cafe is this sort of green, all-encompassing space, like some of the historic spaces in the museum. The West Gallery has green silk velvet, which we rewove for the project. But there are other spaces, the breakfast room also, which is now open to the public, was green. And in fact, as we went through all the documents about the museum at the beginning, we realized more and more that pretty much everything was green. And green was one of those colors that was considered the best for the works of art and for the house, then museum. So I think it's, adding another green space to the museum, to me, it's just a wonderful homage to what came before.
Yeah, everything was really in service to, in homage to the collection. So I just spent a lot of time being able to come and look at the reinstallation of the spaces and go visit all my favorite paintings, and also just like a little heat-seeking missile looking for all the greens. I was just like, there's so many fabulous paintings, there's so many fabulous works on paper, and certainly in the Thomas More painting, and
so, the Bronzino,
and
Veronese, and
oh my
a lot
God.
of greens.
Yeah, a lot of greens. This room that we're sitting in, this piece is called Fugue, and I wanted to have a musicality to this and movement and layers of image and paint and shadow and tonality that is a fugue. For me, it has a lot of sound, and there's a quietness of the frieze that is in contrast with this.
I think people will wonder why we call this cafe Westmoreland. And Westmoreland is a county in the United Kingdom, which inspired the naming of a county in Pennsylvania, which is where the Frick family lived. And so Westmoreland for the family was always a very important name, to the point that Frick called his train Westmoreland, his private train. And I like the fact that, not because of any design, but the space of the restaurant, of the cafe, feels a little bit like a train car. You have the windows on one side, you have the mirrors on the other, and then above it you have the frieze, which in my mind is almost like what you see out of the window as you're traveling on this imaginary train. Mm-hmm. So what inspired you for those landscapes? I mean, it's a lot more figurative in a way than obviously the work in this room. How do you see the difference between the two, and what inspired you for it?
How do you paint a mural for the Frick, no pressure, and make it so that it feels in conversation with the collection? So that was already sort of given into the architectural design of the space, is that there would be this frieze that wrapped around the entire room. So just formally, that actually made me think of a frieze as like this processional event that actually is experienced almost in a cinematographic way, or that your eye has to move and travel around length and distance and the shape of the space. I really was looking at so many of the Renaissance drawings and works on paper in the collection, and so much of my work anyway is really is very much research-based in looking at the history of landscape and of pictorial space. And I was thinking a lot about the artists of the Netherlands and the Northern Renaissance painters who were like building the imagined landscape, because that was not observational and there were no high vistas for them to, paint from, and thinking of the landscape as this sort of symbolic space, this metaphysical space, this not necessarily an observational space. That was also a big part of how I wanted to approach this, is that it's continuous and it makes a kind of visual harmony and sense, but then as you study it more, it starts to break down, and there's sort of certain irrational parts of it as well.
And in terms of inspiration, obviously, you're talking about Western draftsmen like, Althofer, like Dürer, but also there is a certain Asian, Japanese, Chinese even sort of influence coming in. And I think we all think of the Frick as a museum primarily of Western art, which it is, but there are moments where, we're now exhibiting a lot more blue and white porcelain. Many of these pieces have landscapes on them. And you've obviously been inspired by Whistler as well, who's someone else who was also very inspired by non-European Asian art. How do you see that mixing in your work?
I definitely look at a lot of Japanese scroll painting and screens, and looking at the way, again, how pictorial space is so distorted in the Japanese aesthetic around presenting pictorial space. It's flattened. They play with proportion, really thinking about elongating shapes. Pictorial space is this volatile and can be this very destabilized thing. We so often think that like the landscape is just representing this sort of moment that's captured, and I like to think of it as in terms of like how it feels like it's not stabilized, and it can also kind of make you feel that you're sort of ungrounded yourself as you're looking at particular works of art.
And I know that there is another part of the project that is not the mural that you also worked on.
Yes, I was invited to come up with the bas-relief ceilings, the plaster ceilings in the space that were based on Gilded Age architectural homes where these beautiful plaster medallions would be centered in a room, the base for the chandelier. So I was sort of playing off that, but wanting to think about a sort of deconstructed version of a traditional plaster medallion. And so I came up with multiple watercolors and drawings that were then interpreted by a sculptor, and he was able to like take my drawings and interpret them in clay. It was thrilling to work in this cross-disciplinary way with this other wonderful, talented sculptor.
So like various different parts of this project, this has been a collaboration with many people. Of course, the space is a new space designed by Annabelle Seldorf. The interior of the cafe was envisioned by Brian O'Sullivan in London. And you then sort of came in, obviously, with the murals and the medallions. But you also worked with a team of people.
I did. I had two fabulous young artists who are very dear to me, Taylor Morgan and Lauren Clark. They're both New York-based artists, and we've worked together, collaborated on various installations that I've had in the past. They really were integral in building the underpainting, the layers, and we approached it very much like a fresco, and there was fresco technique and particular underpaintings that required so much time and detail to get right. And I really trusted their hand. Both of them are just wonderful painters, and they know my work well, and we just had a great synergy together, and just settled in here. I mean, I feel like so much work got done at night when I was here alone, and I really was like the little mouse at the Frick, just scurrying around like all by myself in the Frick. That's probably one of my best memories about this whole project, is just being quiet and alone here and working, just me and like the security guards. But then Taylor and Lauren would be around at night, and we'd just play our music and paint, and we just had a lot of fun too. They're just these wonderful young people that I admire so much.
So as visitors to museums and people who look at art, often one of the big questions is, how did this actually come about? How was it made? And, you know, we all sit in front of great frescoes from the past, great mural cycles. You know, I imagine Diego Rivera or even Michelangelo, and, you know, one could ask, how did you actually do this? So can you tell our viewers a little bit about how it was actually made? What sort of techniques did you use to make these murals?
You know, I started with a whole series of works on paper and watercolor studies that really helped to kind of lay the structural aspect of the murals and the frieze. The first, actually, like several days was just sort of thinking about the optics of color and the chromatic shifts and just sort of getting settled into the space and the actual quality of light and the changing light of the day. And in particular, in the room that we're in, there was sort of this like late afternoon rake of light that would come in and would break into all this like beautiful little fractured light as it came through. And we were all like, look at this light coming in here. We have to somehow like work in this dappled light into the density of the green. And so it was like settling in to not like come in here and sort of impose a vision, but it was more just like, okay, let's just like take a moment and actually experience the space before we actually jumped in to paint. It's many, many layers of paint. And the first few weeks were really just about building the foundation of the surfaces that were really approached as if they were fresco paintings, because we had the walls prepared extremely chalky and absorbent so that they would actually receive the first layers of paint in a very particular way. And so that was, we were trying to actually emulate the techniques and the materiality of fresco without actually doing a fresco painting.
Yeah, and for us here at the Frick, I think it was just such a pleasure to have you and your team here working, you know, starting with effectively a blank slate, you know, blank walls and empty spaces, and then see these incredible murals come to life. And now we're still in a moment as we're recording this where the furniture for the cafe is coming in, and I'm imagining what will this space feel like when it's actually inhabited by our public, by visitors, by people coming here to drink and eat. How do you feel about that, and how people will respond to your work?
I hope that it feels like that you're at the Frick. You know, I really wanted this piece to integrate with all the history of the Frick collection, and this feels, even as a contemporary work of art, that it feels very specific to place and to the incredible new chapter of this extraordinary museum.
Well, thank you, Darren, and thank you for this incredible artwork that you've given us and the visitors to the Frick. I hope that everyone who will come to the cafe, to the Westmoreland, will enjoy these incredible murals, and I hope that this will become part of the, you know, one of the pieces of the identity of the museum for the future. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Xavier.